In this video, I'll be demoing some of the more advanced and potentially confusing skills from Dune Awakening. A lot of the game skills are just passive buffs that are self-explanatory, and the easier skills to unlock you've probably already tried or seen someone else use, so I've picked just a mere 27 to discuss. Starting with Trooper. Energy Capsule is a straightforward ranged damage buff. In this clip, I'll take down the first enemy in 5 shots, pop the pill, and the second enemy goes down in 4 shots. The casting animation is a bit long for my taste, considering the effect only lasts 10 seconds. It's pretty much just long enough to dispatch a single enemy, so probably best for sniping heavies. The Suspensor Blast you're likely to have seen used against you by the heavy NPCs. This is a mild AoE stun that's very brief. Sometimes I can't even stagger a single enemy long enough to get a slow blade in, and even though you can charge it and try to time it, the small range makes it difficult to catch multiple enemies with this. Reflexive Reload is a Spice Prescience passive, so in this clip I nearly empty my rifle, I throw a grenade, and my rifle is reloaded automatically. The Collapse Grenade has a pretty wide range, but once again the stun is very brief. It also doesn't always trigger when I throw it. It's the buggiest of the grenades in my experience. The Attractor field is pretty much a gimmick. I tried using it to extend the effective range of the Vulcan and GRDA 44 since they're not very accurate. So the idea is that some shots that would normally miss now hit the target as long as they hit the field, but with shielded enemies I found that they just stop shooting as soon as you tag them with the Attractor field, which means you're only hitting their shield with this. Since the Attractor field doesn't last very long, this isn't enough time to actually take down the shield, so I rule it a waste of time. For simpler enemies, it sort of seems to work to extend a shotgun blast, but these enemies are so easy to dispatch anyway, this is just style points really. On to Bene Gesserit. Bindu Dodge is a Spice Prescience passive that prevents blade and dart damage for 1 second after a parry. This is totally useless. The best scenario I could think of for this is that when multiple melee enemies rush you, and you parry with a short blade and stagger one, then maybe the other guys can't hurt you while you slow blade the staggered one, but the problem is you have a shield, and shield damage still staggers you during the brief invulnerability window. So this can only give you 1 second of protection if you're not using a shield, which is basically never. Screech is another Spice Prescience passive. It just briefly stuns nearby enemies when you use a targeted voice command like Compel. Nice. Litany Against Fear gives you an armor multiplier. Considering how much more important your shield durability is than your armor strength, this isn't as good as it would be in other games. Against a mixed mob using fire, poison, and gravity mines, I didn't find that this suddenly turned you into a tank that could perform brazen attacks. Pretty much you have to play the same way you always do, and maybe you just use one less medkit. Prana-Bindu Strikes is an elaborate stun ability. It's annoying when you're on the receiving end of it, but it's not very practical compared to alternatives. Weirding Step is one of the best combat skills in the game. Stuns an enemy and teleports you behind them, allowing you to dodge attacks while attacking. You can even teleport over gaps, making this just a great movement ability. Now, before we leave Bene Gesserit, I briefly wanted to go over the health-related skills. These are popular skills, but I do find their descriptions to be a bit confusing, so I definitely wanted to cover them. So, in Dune Awakening, when you are below 1/3 of your maximum health, your health will automatically begin to regenerate back to 1/3 at a rate of 4 health per second, after a delay of 16 seconds. If you haven't noticed that there's auto-regenerating health in this game, that would be why, because there's a delay of 16 seconds before it kicks in. Most of the time, you heal with heal kits, and they have an instant phase and a heal over time phase. So you get half the heal instantly, and then the second half is awarded at a rate of 2 health per second after that, and it will be cut short if you take damage before it completes. So looking at the Bene Gesserit health skills, we have Vitality, which simply increases your maximum health, which also increases the 1/3 healing regeneration threshold. So you start with 150 health and will regen up to 50 when below 50. Vitality can buff your max health up to 205, meaning you will automatically regenerate up to 68 when below 68. The recovery and trauma recovery skills both buff your healing regen limit, meaning with both of them you can buff that 1/3 another 50%, meaning that combined with Vitality, you can automatically regenerate up to 103 health when below 103 health. Trauma recovery also buffs your healing regen rate up to 20%, meaning that when your health regenerates, it does so at up to 4.8 health per second instead of just 4 health per second. Per Vash Kawai's testing, self-healing has an undocumented feature. As the description suggests, it increases the effectiveness of both parts of heal kits. So the instant health restored, you can buff up to 30%, and the heal over time portion is also buffed 30%. But self-healing also buffs your healing regen rate by another 25%. So that's up to 6 health per second with trauma recovery. But honestly, because there's a 16-second delay on healing regeneration, regeneration almost never comes into play unless you're also using Swordmaster's Thrive on Danger skill, which we'll cover later. So in the Bene Gesserit tree, the most important skills are just Vitality to boost your max health and self-healing to make heal kits more effective. On to Mentat. Shield Overcharge is a Spice Presence technique. When you start hitting somebody with a shield, there's a little red weak point that appears, and if you hit that, you get some bonus damage. Exploit Weakness is very similar. Once you hit an enemy, a white weak point spawns where you can deal bonus damage. It can be quite difficult to line these up, especially in a case like this one, where the weakness is initially hidden from view until the enemy walks out from behind cover, and it also disappears after a while if you're not aiming. It is kind of a fun minigame though. The Hunter-Seeker is a neat assassination weapon. You switch into the special drone view where you have Ornithopter-style controls. Enemies are invisible unless they're moving, and then they show up as yellow. You press the boost button at the bottom of the screen to launch the drone through their body. At 1200 damage, this will one-shot most enemies. The pitfalls are that you're vulnerable while piloting, the range is very short, and enemies can see the drone and attack it, so it's pretty situational as to when you can get away with using this. Source of Power gives you an AoE where you and allies have nearly infinite power over your shields and suspensors for about 20 seconds. Your shield can take quite a few hits with this, and since the range extends a fair ways vertically, this skill can help you power both your shield and suspensor to get yourself out of a tight situation. Poison Tooth is a lore-accurate meme. You don't trigger this, it gets triggered automatically when you get downed in combat, dropping a poison cloud where you died. And just like in the first book and movie, it doesn't actually kill your target. It does so little damage that you'll find your would-be target is still very much alive when you come back for your stuff. Okay, Planetologist. So first, Cartographer lets you create maps to give to other players. You have to go to a vendor, such as this one at Pinnacle Station, and buy a blank sig chart for 1500 Solari. Then you can use the Cartographer skill from your map view to fill in a blank sig chart with all the information you've uncovered for a given map area. Another player can consume this filled sig chart to populate their map with the same information without them having to explore or perform a survey themselves. The primary use for these charts is supposed to be the Deep Desert, which gets reset once a week. One person might go make new charts for the week and then hand them out to everyone else in their guild, for example. You don't really need this though, as each week's map is published online at planetologist.app, which brings us to the Spice Surveyor skill. This is also a Deep Desert oriented skill. What happens is normally if you launch a survey probe in the Deep Desert, you uncover major points of interest, but nothing about spice. But when you have the Spice Surveyor skill, when you look at any surveyed area, you'll get a new spice yield section that tells you what size of spice field, if any, you expect to find in the surveyed sector. So the first problem is that this information too is published on planetologist.app. The second problem is that it's only useful if you're making sync charts, because it won't save you personally any time finding spice fields. Although Spice Surveyor tells you that there is spice in a sector, it doesn't give you the precise location of a spice field, so you still have to fly around the sector and look for it. And because the fields and land masses are randomly distributed, you'll often find a spice field with your eyes before you find a spot where you can launch a survey probe from. And it takes 25 seconds to complete the survey anyways, 25 seconds that you could just use to fly over the sector. So as an individual, it's a complete waste of time. It only makes sense to be able to add spice information to a sync chart to give to someone else, which again, you don't need to do because the main survey info is already publicly available. And the only other Planetologist skill I'll talk about is Scanner Mastery, because you might be wondering what a hand scanner is even useful for. Well, outside of a few story quests that require a hand scanner, you can use a hand scanner to quickly identify small resources nearby. These will get added to your map as well, but the more interesting thing you can do is scan an enemy camp, where enemies will show up as water sources, essentially giving you wall hacks. You can actually get special hand scanners that only show living targets. So a hand scanner can be useful if you just want to sneak into a base and steal something without getting into a fight, and it's also helpful at night or in a dust storm where enemies are hard to see due to low visibility, and the Scanner Mastery skill just extends your scanner radius for these purposes. And finally, Swordmaster. Thrive on Danger, I mentioned before when talking about the Bene Gesserit health perks. Thrive on Danger is the best skill for boosting your automatic health regeneration. It only applies when you're below 1/3 of your maximum health, but it reduces the normal health regeneration delay by 75%. The standard delay is 16 seconds before regeneration kicks in. 16 seconds is completely useless for combat, but Thrive on Danger reduces that delay to just 4 seconds, and it also doubles your healing rate from 4 health per second to 8 health per second. Confusingly, this perk calls healing regen rate increase health regeneration, but it's the same stat as the one buffed by trauma recovery and self-healing from the Bene Gesserit tree. Do note that most healing skills are passive, but trauma recovery and Thrive on Danger are techniques, so they do take up a technique slot. The other Swordmaster healing perk is Field Medicine. It buffs the instant portion of heal kits, whereas the Bene Gesserit self-healing skill buffs both the instant portion and the heal over time portion. Precise Parry is a Spice Prescience passive. There's no animation associated with it. Parry is just debuff enemy damage mitigation. Prescient Strike is the same. This is just a buff to your melee damage after a Swordmaster ability. According to Vash Kawaii, it's basically a 1.575 damage multiplier, not a 2x multiplier as the description might imply, and since it's literally only a buff on a single hit after you trigger a Swordmaster ability, this is really a minor buff overall. Foil is similar to Retaliate. You trigger it just before you parry to turn your parry into a riposte that debuffs the enemy's damage for 10 seconds. This might be okay in PvP, but against NPCs it's kind of pointless, because normally when you parry a melee NPC, you just end them right after. Any extra damage or status you apply to them is kind of pointless. Eye of the Storm, you come across in one of the story quests. It looks a little more impressive there. It doesn't do much damage. It's basically a small AoE stun. So that about covers the advanced skills from Dune Awakening. They're honestly pretty underwhelming compared to your starting abilities, so you'll have to decide for yourself if it's really worth all the back and forth to the social hubs to fully unlock all the skill trees. In my opinion, the trainer dialogue and backstories are probably more interesting than the skills themselves, but hopefully at least now you know what to expect.